And Judy, are you already there in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, I am.
All right, stand by, everybody. All right. Judy, let's begin.
Perfect, Andy. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NAAEE's monthly webinar series. My name is Judy Brous, and I'm the Executive Director of NAAEE, and we are so thrilled that you could all join us. And we have an exciting presenter today, Andy Goodman, who will be talking about storytelling, and I'll introduce him more formally in a minute. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background on our webinar series, which we started earlier this year, and then I'll turn it over to Andy. So once a month, we're trying to highlight new ideas and thinking in the field, and we want to showcase leaders who are working in environmental education and related fields, and to see what they can bring to our thinking and improving our own practice. So please let us know if you have any ideas for possible speakers and topics in the future. And our next webinar is probably going to be on June 8th. We're still waiting for one more confirmation, and it's all about building a stronger and more inclusive movement, and it's something that you won't want to miss. So we're really excited about that. Today, what we're going to do is, after this quick introduction, Andy is going to give his presentation. You're going to be able to ask questions throughout, and he'll explain how the platform works. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll have a few closing comments. So it gives me now great pleasure to introduce Andy Goodman. I've heard Andy giving a presentation. I first heard him giving a presentation on how to give a presentation, and from then on, I was completely hooked. He is such a terrific supporter of NAAEE and environmental education, and he recently gave a wonderful keynote that some of you might have heard that was focused on storytelling at the conference in San Diego last year. He's a fantastic communicator. He cares about helping nonprofits succeed, and he believes that stories have incredible power. Andy's the director of the Goodman Center. He's a well-known author, speaker, and consultant working in public interest communications. And he is a pro on storytelling, as well as how to give great presentations and how to think about strategic communications in our work. And he wrote the book that I love, this title, Why Bad Presentations Happen to Good People. He's spoken at everywhere from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government to the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. And Andy is all about good causes, and he's really helped many of us do better at what we do. There's so much more I could say, but I think I'll turn it over to Andy so that you can learn from the pro. Let's give him a virtual warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Judy, and thank you all for making time to be with us today. It's really a pleasure to be here. At the Goodman Center, our classes are actually co-taught. I'll be the one you'll be hearing from the most, but also on the line with us now is our Associate Director, Celia Hoffman. I don't know if your phone is unmuted. Celia, can you say good morning to everybody? Are you there?
Good morning.
There you are. There, she's right there. As you ask questions throughout the webinar, which I'll show you how to do in a moment, Celia will be the one keeping an eye on the chat box. She may respond to you directly if she knows the answer, or she'll be saving your questions to report to me later, but she's the other half of this team here, so I wanted you to meet her as well. Let me tell you how to participate to the fullest. First of all, the phone lines have been muted. We do that because we're going to have as many as 100 or more people on the line today, so we couldn't leave the lines open. So if you want to ask a question at any point, please put it in the chat box there on the lower left-hand portion of your screen. It's possible I might call on you to ask your question live so we can hear your voice. If I call on you, to mute your own phone, you have to press star and then 7. So you might want to write that down, star 7 to unmute. And if I call on you and we have a quick conversation, then after that you'll have to press star and 6 to remute your phone. So those are the magic numbers. Otherwise, everything happens in that chat box in the lower left-hand corner. If you type a question there, it comes directly. Me and Celia and Judy will all see it. If you want to ask something offline, that's also a good place to do it. But we're the only ones who'll see it, so the whole class will not. So you can communicate with us over there. And we're recording today's webinar. So if you arrive late, leave early, or miss any part, when we're all done, NAAEE will have the recording. It'll be posted on their website, or Judy will have some way of getting it to you. So know that that will be available to you when we're all done. So that's how you play the game. Now, in the time we have together today, this very quick hour, here's what we're going to do. First, a brief review of story structure. When I was in San Diego last year and had a chance to see and meet some of you, we talked in depth about the structure of a good story. For those of you who are there, this will be a refresher. For those of you who are not, we're going to give you the basics real quick. Once we've done that, then I want to move on to the 10 most common mistakes. In our experience of teaching storytelling, and we've been doing it for a long time, teaching in person and also online, we've noticed that when people get filled with the zeal of storytelling and they're ready to go out there and do it, there are 10 mistakes that they commonly make. So what I want to do today is point them out for you and say, look, here are the potholes. Let's not step in them. And lastly, we're going to talk about 6 guidelines to help you capture the whole story. Often when you go out there and you want to interview somebody to find out, it's their story, not your story, there are certain questions that you can ask them that will help them tell you the whole story. So this will make you a better interviewer and better at capturing the whole story for you to use to your purposes. So that's what we're going to do. And if at any point you have a question, sorry about that, any point you have a question, just type in the chat box, and if we don't answer it right away, know that we'll stop periodically and I'll ask Celia, what are some of the questions that have come up, and we'll hear from you then. So that's how we go. All right. So for story structure, I think the best way to demonstrate good story structure and teach it to you is to tell you one of my favorite stories of all time. And the story has a title. It's called It's Going to Be Okay, Jennifer. Now, this is not my story. This actually happened to a man named Richard Eyre, E-Y-R-E. Richard and his wife, Linda Eyre, are parenting consultants. What they do for a living is they look for examples of good parenting, and they collect them. And they put them on their website, like right here, valuesparenting.com, or in their books and presentations, so that parents can learn from the wisdom of other parents. So that's what Richard Eyre does for a living. He looks for moments of good parenting. But on this particular day, there he is, you see on the left there in the supermarket. He's at the deli counter waiting for his order of roast beef or turkey or whatever, minding his own business, when a woman passes by pushing a shopping cart like you see here with a crying child. And that child is crying right in her mom's face. Clearly doesn't want to be there. But as mother and daughter pass behind Richard Eyre, he hears the mother speaking in this calm and controlled voice, and he hears her say, "It's going to be okay, Jennifer. We're going to get the bread and the cereal and the honey, and we're going to go home." And off she goes. And he thinks to himself, okay, that's impressive. That child is crying right in mom's face, and she's holding it together. And he's curious, how does she do it? Short of drugs, what is her trick? But before he can turn around and grab her, she's off, headed down another aisle. He's waiting for his number to come up. "Hi, number 6, do you have my turkey?" Finally, he gets his order, throws it in his basket. Now he's on a hunt through the supermarket looking for this woman, looking down the aisles. Where is she? Where is she? Finally, he spots her down the cereal aisle. The child, still crying. The mother, still talking softly. And he hears her say, "It's going to be okay, Jennifer. We've got the Cheerios now. We're going to get the bread and the honey, and we're going to go home." Well, he really wants to talk to her now. He's just so impressed with the way mom is so composed. But before he can get to her, a cart coming the other way cuts him off. The woman doesn't see him. She rounds the corner, continuing her hunt. "Excuse me, miss." She doesn't hear him. She's gone. So he thinks to himself, well, this is futile. Why am I chasing her? I know where she's going to end up. So he goes to the front of the store, sort of hangs out around the express lanes, and sure enough, a few minutes later, mother and daughter pull up in the shopping cart. Little girl, still crying. Mom, still talking softly. And he hears her say again, "It's going to be okay, Jennifer. We're going to put this stuff right here. We're going to pay the man. We're going to go home." So now he's right behind her in the express line. He just taps her on the shoulder. He says, "Hi, my name's Richard Eyre. I'm a parenting consultant. I look for examples of good parenting, for a living, I'm so impressed with the way you're talking to your daughter, even though she's crying. Mind if I ask you a few questions? And the woman says, yeah, sure, whatever. And he says, well, first of all, how old is little Jennifer? And the woman says, I'm Jennifer. Well, I hope you're laughing. It's always weird with the phones muted. It's like, did they enjoy that? I hope you did. Anyway, Richard Eyre tells that story to make the point that sometimes as a parent, talking to yourself is not a form of insanity. But I like to tell that story because that story has classic story structure from beginning to middle to end. So let's go back and take a quick look at it to see what he did and how it works so well. First of all stories start by introducing us to a character that we can identify with. It can be a male or a female. In this case, it's a male. It's Richard Eyre. He's our protagonist. And we need to know something about him, what we would call his world in balance. Richard Eyre, he's a parenting consultant. He looks for moments of good parenting. That's what he does. Today it's a Saturday. It's his day off. He's in a supermarket. That's all you need to know. But then something happens to throw his world out of balance, what we call the inciting incident. And now he has a goal. There's something he wants. He's minding his own business at the deli counter. He hears what sounds like a moment of good parenting, and now he thinks, I want to find out how she does that. But it's not going to be easy. He's going to have to work to get there. So off he goes on this journey to find out how is mom keeping it together. Now what happens next is critical. On the way to the goal, there has to be some type of barrier, something that keeps them from getting right to the goal, something that makes the audience lean in and go, oh, well then what happened? In this case, it's not very dramatic, but there are little barriers along the way. The woman is off on her shop. He's blocked by a shopping cart, and running into these barriers builds up tension. Makes us want to know, hey, what's going to happen? And in good stories, there's often more than just one barrier. With every new obstacle, more tension, more drama, more interest. Is he ever going to get there? Is she ever going to do it? Until our hero, our protagonist, gets around the last barrier, and maybe they get to the goal, or maybe something else happens. In this case, he got a surprise answer. But whatever it is, we have a clear resolution. So what you're looking at here, and the story that Richard Eyre told, and the pattern that most stories follow that we hear every day, is simply the three-act structure of storytelling. Act 1 answers the most common questions in our mind. Who is this story about, and what do they want? Act 2, the middle, the pursuit of the thing, running into problems and solving problems. Act 3, the end, what happened, and what does it mean? And, this is not my construct. This is not a white thing or a Western thing. This belongs to no race, creed, religion, or nationality. This is the human experience of storytelling, the most common form of story you'll find anywhere on the globe. So, when you tell your stories about your work, if it has all these elements, then something very deep starts to resonate in your audience. They know who it's about. They know who they're following. They see them on this journey. It has its ups and downs. They go on this emotional trip, and they end up at a place where they go, so that's what happened. What does it mean to her? What does it mean to me? Now, that's a very quick rundown, but this is the basic structure of stories that's been handed down to us from the earliest myths and fables. So, with that as background, with that as review, let's talk about the most common mistakes, because even when people know this, they know this structure, they then go out and make some very predictable mistakes. The first set of mistakes tend to be around the choice of protagonist, or how the protagonist is described. Remember, at the opening of your story, when you introduce this person, something very important has to happen with your audience. There has to be a process of identification. They have to say, I like that person. I want that person to succeed. That person reminds me of me. Some process has happened where that person, we attach to them and they become our guide through the story. If that doesn't happen, if we don't identify with that person, if we don't care about that person, then the story is proceeding and we're just watching on the sidelines, don't really care. So it's really critical that as we introduce our protagonists, we do the things that make sure that people care. Now, I want to show you how this can go wrong. I want to show you two examples. These are both from organizations working on the issue of homelessness. Two organizations telling stories to get you to care about the people in the story and care about their work around homelessness. But when it comes to getting you to identify with the protagonist, one is going to succeed, and I think the other is going to fail. You have to tell me which is which. The first story was produced by the Corporation for Supportive Housing, fantastic nonprofit, offices all around the U.S. They have one of the people they help, Daryl, tell his story. Now I'm going to play you the video. This audio is going to come through your computer speakers. So I'm going to mute my phone. So turn up your computer speakers if you have them. You'll see the video on the screen, and we'll watch Daryl tell his story.
The first time I got out of jail I was still homeless, and I was staying from shelter to shelter, sometimes under the bridge. I watched a lot of my friends die out there. Just a lot of tragedy. By me being homeless for so long, I would stay out in the streets more than I would stay home, you know. But that kind of changed once I got arrested one more time. And this time, you know, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Once I got out, I moved over to South Minneapolis, which is my apartment here. It was amazing that people here wanted to help me like that. It seemed like, you know, that they knew where I was coming from, you know, like they had been there before. And you know, it's a really special program. These programs does work. And just give the people a chance. They need it.
Okay, there you go. There's Daryl's story from the Corporation for Supportive Housing. Now, I want you to take a look at Beth's story. This is from another nonprofit. I think it's called Take Action. Again, the issue is homelessness, but they're going to tell, Beth's going to tell her story in a very different way. So take a look at this, and then we'll talk about how they're different and why one may be more effective than the other. Again, the audio will come through your computer speakers.
Elizabeth was born on a Monday in the early morning hours. Her parents nicknamed her Beth and loved her more than life. Beth always knew she would be a famous artist, and the entire world would love and adore her. Then one day, something terrible happened to Beth's mom and dad, and Beth never saw them again. She was shuffled from house to house and school to school, never attached to anything or anyone. When Beth was 17, she got a job in a small apartment she could barely afford. She took the bus to work and every night would head home alone to her little apartment to paint until late into the night. One morning, Beth woke up and she was very sick. Beth finally saw a doctor who prescribed her some medicine. It was very expensive. Beth searched for a job closer to her apartment, but there were none to be found. She started selling her belongings, even her mother's jewelry. But the bills piled up and up and up. Beth lost her phone, her lights, her heat, and eventually her home. She asked for work. She asked for money. Then one day, she stopped asking for anything.
There you go. There's Beth's story. So, how are they different? Well, let me take off the table the obvious differences. So Daryl's story is the story of an African-American man. Beth's story is a story of a Caucasian woman. Daryl's story is told in video. Beth's story is told in animation. Those are important differences, but to me, they're not the most significant differences when we get to this issue of identification. Because what Beth's story does so well is it starts the character's story at a point where we can all identify with and care about her. She is a child. She has loving parents. She has big dreams. You know, we're on her side. We want to see her succeed. And then something awful happens to her, and a series of unfortunate events befall her, and then we see why she becomes homeless. And this person who we were rooting for from the beginning, we're still rooting for her at the end. Now, Daryl starts his story. Do you remember the very first thing he tells you? He talks about being incarcerated, getting out of jail. I would imagine for most of us, jail has not been part of our experience. So right away, Daryl's starting by identifying himself as somebody whose life has been different from ours. And he then proceeds to talk about all the things that happened to him, living under the bridge, going back into jail, et cetera, et cetera. It makes it tougher to identify with Daryl. If you actually met him and talked to him and found out that he grew up in Cleveland, he was the youngest of 6, his older brothers never gave him anything, he was always struggling, then you might care more about him. You might have a more full-rounded picture. So the most important thing to take away from this is that when you introduce your protagonist, try and introduce them at a place or in a way where we see them either at their best or describing some aspect or displaying some aspect of their character that we can attach to and like. It's very important that the audience identifies with the protagonists. Another problem can be that we just don't give enough physical description. If it's not a video, if we're not looking at pictures, if we're just reading text or if we're just telling the story, if we don't describe the character, then people can't see them in their mind's eye, and they just become like what you see here, a silhouette. So a little bit of description is helpful too. Names are important. Sometimes to protect privacy, we'll refer to them as the client or Mr. S or the student or what have you. It's tough to attach to somebody without a name. So some advice about naming characters in your stories. Let me give you 3 choices. First, best case scenario is if the story is about somebody else, they give you permission to use their actual names. And when that's the case, get a permission slip. There's an example New York City uses. Have them fill out name, et cetera, so you have written permission to use their name. Sometimes people will say, well, you can use my story, but I'd like it if you just change the name and a few facts to protect privacy. So in that case, give them a pseudonym. This is a story of Marcus growing up in New York City. At least with a name, we have something human to hold on to. And you can say at the end of the story, names have been changed to protect privacy. Now, in some communities and in some situations, people have said, this community is so small, we could change the name and a few facts, but everybody would still know who we're talking about. So what do we do? Well, in that case, you have permission to use and create composite characters, where you create a person, you give them a name so they are human and people identify with them, but what they represent is many different people. And I'll show you an example of this. Feeding America wants to tell their story, and so they created a character named Kate, a little girl who we can identify with. Again, I'm going to show you a short video. This will come through your computer speakers, but look how Feeding America creates a person we can like and identify with by giving her a name. Here's the story of Kate.
Hello?
nicely done. And again, you can see they create a character. They make her identifiable, somebody that we can like and root for. They give her a name, but she represents many different Kates out there in the community. Second problem, common problem, is that there's no good answer to why should I, the audience, care. We set up a story. Oops, going the wrong way here. Come on, Andy, you can do this right. We set up a story, and we have the structure right. We have a person, something happens that launches them on a journey, and they have a clear goal. But too often, we're too concerned with the how will they get there, as opposed to why the audience should care. So you've got to ask yourself, if I launch somebody on a journey, have I done the necessary things where the audience cares about the outcome? Now here, there are two ways of playing it. Maybe the goal is important to the audience. It's a worthy goal, something I can say, yes, whether I know a whole lot about this person or not, this is a worthy goal, I hope they get there. Or maybe the goal doesn't mean that much to me, but I like the hero, I like the protagonist, I want to see this person succeed regardless of what the goal is. So one of those two things has to be happening. They've got to either care about the goal or the person. Otherwise, again, they're just sitting, standing by. You're telling your story, and they're like, yawn, I don't care. Now, I'll tell you a little technique about getting people to like the protagonist. This comes right out of Hollywood. Something that they teach here to people who are writing for TV or for film is early in your story, give your character what they call a pet the dog scene. This is a true Hollywood tip. What they mean here is not literally that the character has to pet a dog, but if you ever see somebody in a TV show or a movie petting a dog, you think, oh, what a nice person, they're kind to animals. It sort of symbolizes the notion of give them a moment where we see them being a nice person. That way we can identify with them. An example I'll give you, in the movie Captain Phillips, where Tom Hanks played the captain of the ship that was hijacked by Somali pirates, when Tom Hanks gets on the ship, he's kind of gruff and all business, and he's not very likable in those early scenes. But that's not how we meet him. In the movie, if you saw it and remember, the very first scene we see of him is with him and his wife driving to the airport where he's going to fly to the port where he's going to get on the boat. And while he and his wife are driving to the airport, they're talking about their son and a parenting issue that's come up. And we see that Tom Hanks is a caring father. He's concerned, he's paying attention, he's involved. So we like him. The likable Tom Hanks comes through there. When he gets on the boat, not so likable, but we've already attached him. We realize this is a nice guy who, with his crew, has to be a little bit gruff. But the lesson for you again is, at the outset of your story, what have you done? What simple thing can you do that shows us that these characters are nice people and we're going to root for them the rest of the way? Where's your pet the dog scene? Here's a really common problem. So common that we're going to focus on this a little bit right now. Too much too soon. This is when the writer has just thrown everything at you. It's like, I'm so excited to tell you this story, I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you. The problem is that they overwhelm us, and we give up. It's like, oh, gosh, there's just too much to take in here. I'm going to give up on this story. Now, let me show you an example. Here's the first two paragraphs of a story about a health department where a couple of people working there get a complaint call. What I want you to do right now is read these two paragraphs. When you're done, press your raise hand button on your interface here so I'll know you're done. I'm going to be quiet. You guys read. Press the button when you're done. Okay, most hands are up. If you raise your hand, press the button again to lower your hand. Let's get all hands down. Everybody put your hand down. Thank you very much, everybody. All hands down. So, look, what we have here is pretty simple. It's a story of two people working in a health department. One day a call comes in. There's a complaint. You got a smoker living next to a non-smoker, and the person running the apartment building, they need some help. Policy, whatever, can you help? That's what the story's about. But look at what the writer has given you here. First of all, how many different characters are they asking you to keep track of in just these first two paragraphs? Well, the answer is 5. You've got Bonnie, who takes the call from Susan. You've got Bob Coughlin, the tenant who the call's about, his neighbor, who's the smoker, and Steve Brown, who works with Bonnie in the office. But all of a sudden, just 2 paragraphs, they're asking us to keep track of 5 different people. That's a lot. How many different geographic locations? Well, we've got 2 big ones. We've got the health department where the call comes in, and we've got the apartments where the problem is located. And then how many important story points? How much do we really need to pay attention to? How much information are they giving us? Well, the answer is a whole bunch. Tenant complaint, bladder cancer, tobacco smoke, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just an overwhelming amount of information, and I would not blame you if, having read these 2 paragraphs, you're like, okay, that's enough. I think I'll look at this later, which means never. So with that feeling, we sent the writer back. We said, look, you got a good story to tell here, but you need to do a better job of pulling people in. You need to give them just enough information to get them involved and to know who this story's about, what these people want, and off we go. So they rewrote, and here's version 2. Take a moment now to please read this, and again, when you're done, raise your hand. Okay, again, most hands are up, so everybody lower your hands. And how is this version different from the first version? It's the same story, but how is it different? Well, number one, we really only have 2 characters that we're really paying attention to. We've got Steve and Bonnie in the office, and a call comes in. So they're really the 2 people that we're paying attention to. We still have 2 locations, the county health department and the Elmwood Park apartments, but that's manageable. But in terms of story points, we've really stripped it down to its basics. A call comes in, it's a complaint, they're looking for help, the kind of help that Steve and Bonnie can offer, and that's what this story is going to be about. Be wary of too much too soon. We see an awful lot of that in the nonprofit world and in the environmental world in particular. We just want to show our audience we know so much, and we put it all on them. Remember, there's just so much they can take in at any one time. 4th, journalistic structure and quotes. We talked about this when we were together in San Diego. You know, in journalism, they teach you the inverted pyramid, give them all the important stuff up front. In narrative storytelling, what we're doing here, you start with just a few facts, but you gradually add and widen and deepen and pull people into the story. And when people talk in dramatic narrative, they talk to each other. And we create scenes which make us feel like we're watching a movie or a play and we're pulled into it. You know, in The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy says this to the wizard, you have a scene. If a journalist were to write this, it would look like this. So when you're telling stories, you want to have scenes. You don't want to have the people talking to the audience. They're talking to each other. So avoid journalistic quotes. Do this and don't do this. That's pretty straightforward. 5th, no real barriers. You know, what makes stories interesting are the barriers. If somebody wants something and they run into brick walls trying to get it, that's when we lean in and go, oh, gee, well, then what'd you do? Without it, It's just, I want to do this thing, I went after it, I got it. And you know, it's just not interesting. As I like to say, in most cases, you don't truly have a story worth telling until I want runs into you can't. That is worth repeating. You don't have a story worth telling until I want runs into you can't. Sixth, the black box. Beware the black box. We see this a lot in the nonprofit world. What's the black box? It looks like this. Here's your organization and the good work that you do. But when you tell a story about it, you do a nice job of describing the problem, but then the problem is encountered by your organization, and out the other side comes the elegant solution. Exactly what you did to solve that problem? Well, it's never really articulated. It's hiding behind words like, thanks to our persistence or innovation or our caring or whatever, good things have happened. Let me show you a classic example of this. Friends of the Children is an organization. This is a wonderful mentoring organization. They identify, and I'll use some jargon here, at-risk youth in elementary school. And they will pair these kids with an adult mentor. And the mentor will stay with that child through elementary school, through middle school, and through high school. Same mentor, same child. We're talking about commitments as long as 12 years. And as a result of it, they're seeing lives, the trajectory of these lives, these kids' lives change dramatically. It's a wonderful program, Friends of the Children. I'm a big fan. I'm not such a fan of how they tell their story. Here's an example on their website. Here's a Friends of the Children success story. It's Freddie's story. Freddie is one of the kids who got mentored. You can see there she's doing well. Let me blow this story up for you. First paragraph. She's 6 years old. She's consistently getting into fights, trouble staying in school, disrespectful to her teachers. We got a pretty good sense of the challenge. Lives with her mother in a housing project. 3rd grade, moves in with a close friend. 7th grade, mom passes away. Throughout this difficult time, Freddie's friend was there by her side, supporting and encouraging her. And where do we end up? Graduated with honors, sophomore at Syracuse, et cetera, et cetera. This is all we get about how the mentoring worked. This is what I mean by the black box. All the good work, everything that really goes into this program, it's all there supporting and encouraging her. That's all you get. Beware the black box. All summary, no scenes. You know, there's a saying in storytelling, good storytellers show, they don't tell. They create scenes. Scenes are where characters talk to each other, where we slow down, where we have rich details and dialogue and a sense of immediacy. We feel like we're right there watching a scene in a TV show or a movie or a play. Summary is the connective tissue. That's where we'll say 6 months later, or it took 2 weeks. You know, that's the equivalent of the montage. But if you just have summary, then you're just telling, and you're never stopping and showing. In her excellent book, Writing Fiction, A Guide to Narrative Craft, this could be just as much about nonfiction. Look at what Janet Burraway says. First, this. But here's the key paragraph. It's quite possible to write a short story in a single scene without any summary at all. It is not possible to write a successful story entirely in summary. You can't just be telling. You got to show. You got to let people see it and feel it. 8th, jargon, abstract, and technical language. Those are your enemies. And I'm not talking necessarily about really fancy, multisyllabic language. Sometimes we can be abstract with very simple words. Look at this description from a home visiting program where nurses come to visit young mothers. Now that's very simple. It's only about 45 words or so. But look at the abstract language. A client struggling to keep up, extremely active, into everything. What they're not doing is giving you really good visual cues so you can see and feel and want to do something. Now here's that exact same paragraph rewritten, and read that and just note the difference. Look at the difference between frustrated and distraught and tears streaming down her cheeks. Ninth most common problem is the didactic, heavy-handed resolution. Remember, at the end of our stories, we want to have people reflect on what happened. So that's what happened. What did that mean to the character? What does it mean to me? What would I do in that situation? If you have reflection, then someone's thinking, they're involved, they're caring, they're wondering how it applies to their life. But if you hit them over the head and tell them exactly what to think, then there's no room. And in fact, sometimes people will go in the opposite direction. They don't like to be manipulated that obviously. You know, the example that comes to mind for me are those PSAs with Sarah McLachlan and that music playing. You've got to know what I'm talking about, with these sad dogs and cats looking out at us from these cages at these shelters where bad things are going to happen, and this music is playing. These spots are so heavy-handed that Sarah McLachlan herself has said, I change the channel when these commercials come on with her own music. So you got to be careful of hitting people over the head. And 10th is problem solved, what do you need me for? You know, at the end of Daryl's story, he talks about the fact that this organization has been so good to him, but where's the ask? What do we need to do? It's kind of like, okay, well, you did a good job for Daryl. Keep up the good work. Corporation for Supportive Housing, I'm on my way. So those are the 10 most common mistakes. And what I want to do now is I want to throw it open. If you have a question or a comment about any of these 10 mistakes, go ahead and put it in the chat box. I haven't seen any while we've been going. Here they are once again. Celia, these might have been scrolling while I was going. Were there any questions that we did not get to or you were not able to answer?
Nope, not yet.
None so far? Okay. I'll give you guys a second to think about it. Any questions about any of these 10 most common mistakes? If you have one, put it in the chat box. If not, we'll move on to the next and last section. Well, seeing nothing coming in the chat box, let's move on. And let's talk about 6 guidelines for capturing the whole story. And again, this is the notion that you know there's a story out there. You want to talk to somebody about it, say, hey, tell me what happened. I think this is a story we can use. You want to make sure they tell you the whole story. Well, here I'm going to defer to an expert, a guy I met named Tim Keelan. This is what he does for a living. Usually corporate clients will hire him to go in with his team and mine their stories. You know, he'll say to them, Tim, here at the very big corporation, we have wonderful stories of customer service and innovation and partnership and blah, blah, blah. But we're too busy making widgets to collect the stories, so you and your boys go get them. That's how they talk at very big corporations. Anyway, so Tim will go in and they'll do interviews. He's done hundreds of interviews, maybe thousands. He's learned a thing or two about how to get people to open up and tell you the whole story. Here's one of the most important things he learned that he told me. People will rarely tell you the whole story the first time around. People are busy. You know, when you ask them the story, they're going to give you the quick version. They're going to gloss over the details. Don't let them. There can be a rich story in there. If you think there's a good story, you're going to need to push back. Now, we had a chance to do this. I went to the University of Detroit Mercy, UDM, to work with their staff to help tell the story of how they work there at UDM. At this workshop was a young woman from the admissions department who wanted to tell a story to get across the notion that in admissions, they're not just sitting there stamping applications, accepted, rejected, wait list. You know, that they'll go out of their way if they see a particularly promising student to help them get through the process and ultimately, you know, matriculate at UDM. When Allison got up to tell her story, this is what she said the first time. Now, there's a story here. I can't imagine what you just read here, that there's a tear streaming down your cheek. So you got to push back a little bit. So let's follow Tim Keelan's rules, and let's push back on this story and make it better. First, don't accept jargon. When people use jargon that's particular to their field, you got to ask them about it. Allison says that Tina, the student, came from an underserved community. Well, there's a piece of jargon. So you got to say to her, hold on. When you say underserved, what do you mean exactly? I'm not getting a picture here. And look at what she tells us. Now look what we have here. Empty storefronts, double-wide trailers parked on the football field. You can visualize that, and now you can start to get a sense of this failing community. Map out a timeline of the story, or put another way, relentlessly ask, and then what happened? And then what happened? Don't let them skip over any steps. Again, Allison wants to run through it. Like I said, we really worked with her because we could all see her potential. Okay, let's take it one step at a time. First, tell me how you met the student Tina. And she describes the first meeting. And then you say, okay, so you met her. Great, you saw somebody with lots of potential. So what happened next? And she tells us, oh, well, interestingly, we told her to apply, but the deadline came and went, and we never received an application. So we called her, and she told us that she got frustrated. The application was too complicated. She couldn't do it. I see. So then what'd you do? Well, we told her if she would come into the office, we wouldn't do it for her, but we'd give her a chair and a desk, and we'd be available. And anytime she had a question, we could help her complete the application. So she came in, and we got it done together. Ah, very good. And then what happened? Well, like I said, she was a good candidate, so she was accepted. But once again, the deadline to declare yes or no came and went. We hadn't heard from her. So we picked up the phone and called the house. What happened then? Well, we got Mom on the phone, and she said, thank you for accepting my daughter, but we can't afford to go to UDM, so thanks, but no thanks. Okay. And then what'd you do? Well, we showed Mom various plans for financial aid, and they were more than eligible for several of them, and so we found the right plan, and we convinced her that they could afford it. Good. And then, well, like I said, she entered the school. She's now in her junior year, and she's looks to a career in healthcare, doing very well. But look at how just by taking it back to the beginning and going step by step, we got so many more rich details. In the same way we don't accept jargon, don't accept the word we. People will often modestly hide behind the word we. Once we convinced Tina's mom that the application process wasn't that complicated, the rest was mostly paperwork, says Allison. Well, when you say we, who else? And it turns out that Ted is also working on this in the admissions office. So we know if we're going to get the whole story, we've got another source to talk to. And when we talk to Ted, he tells us this. Tina's mom was pretty adamant about not accepting any aid. Well, that's interesting. You're offering money and she doesn't want it? I want to know more about that. Here's one of my favorites. Look for moments of vulnerability. Put another way, this is to say, don't just ask what happened. Ask, how did you feel? How did you feel when these things happened? When characters reveal vulnerability, they felt weak, scared, discouraged. I'm never going to get there, giving up hope. That's where we start to root for them. Come on, you can do it. Vulnerability gives us an opportunity to get in the story and to care about the characters. If the character is perfect, never makes a mistake, has no vulnerability, where's the room for us to root for them? That's one of the things about Superman. The thing that makes Superman so appealing? Yeah, it's kryptonite. In fact, as a friend of mine says, he has a formula. He says Superman minus kryptonite would be boring. He would never have a problem. He would solve everything, no vulnerability. So we ask Allison, when Tina's mom didn't want to deal with a financial aid, you're offering her money, and she's turning it down, How did you feel? And Allison tells us this. And we can see her frustration. She wants to help this young lady, and the help is being pushed aside. And lastly, fifth, press for direct quotes. Often when people speak, how they speak, the language they use, the colloquialisms, it tells us something about them. And people will gloss over the quotes in the same way they'll gloss over the details. Ted said Tina's mom was pretty adamant about not accepting the financial aid. Do you remember what she said? And Allison does, and it's telling. Look at what Allison tells us. This family has never taken any handouts. They looked at financial aid as a handout. Isn't that interesting? It insulted their pride, even though the university is trying to help them. Interesting. And lastly, ask for surrounding details. These are the sort of the catch-all questions. You might ask, what was the weather like that day? You sat down for a meal. What did you have to eat? What was she wearing, etc. You never know what you're going to get. Some of it may just be mundane, but sometimes you'll get something interesting. We asked, anything else we should know about Tina's story? And Allison actually had a little grace note for us at the end. So there you go. So here are Tim's 6 techniques for ensuring that you get the whole story. And once again, if you have a question, put it in the chat box. If we call on you, you'll have to press *7 to unmute. Celia, any questions in the chat box while we were talking?
Yes. So Nan Burkhard asked, can you please speak about dealing with technical language, specifically scientific stories?
Yes. When you have highly technical language, first of all, the first question that you have to ask is, who is my audience for this story? If it's highly technical, highly scientific, and you're talking to an audience of colleagues, then you have every right to use the language as technical or scientific as they will understand. If you're talking to the general public, now you may be talking way above their heads if you use the actual language. So you may need to translate into sort of more commonly understood terms. I am not asking you to dumb it down. I'm asking you to open it up. Make sure that you're using terms that people understand. Nobody likes to have you talk over their head using acronyms and technical language you don't understand. So translate it for them. If you use a highly technical word, give them a sense of what it means. Because jargon is an opportunity for people to disconnect. So be aware of your audience, be aware of their level of understanding, and try and speak at that level. Thank you. Celia, any other questions from the chat box?
Yes. Tom Russert had a question, and I've asked him to unmute his phone. Tom, have you unmuted?
Hit *7 unmute, Tom. Not hearing him.
Well, we're not hearing you, Tom. So he asked specifically about how many barriers you might have in a story that's 5 or 10 minutes long and being told out loud.
There's no magic number here. I've heard stories with one barrier. I've heard stories with many barriers, and of different lengths. The key point about barriers is that there has to be at least one. There has to be at least one. Otherwise, there's no challenge along the way. It's the barriers that make stories interesting. The reason we have 3 in our sample is that's a good sort of median number. If you're going to tell a story in 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, you're going to need a couple of twists and turns along the way. So 2 or 3 barriers is a good working number, but there's no hard rule on this. I have to sort of leave that to your discretion.
So Nancy Zapataki would like you to go over another example for the 10th most common mistake.
Yeah, the 10th most common mistake, again, let me go back and pull those up so everybody has the reference. Hold on one sec. Problem solved, what do you need me for? You want to leave people, at the end of a story, you want it to be clear to them, what is it that you need me to do? If your organization solves the problem, but you need more funds to keep doing it, then you want to quickly segue to that at the end of your story. If you need volunteers, if you need people to sign a petition or what have you, yes, you can talk about the progress you're making. Yes, you can talk about solving a specific problem, but presumably you want people to be engaged and to be helping you and not just to sit back and go, well, isn't that nice, they're effective, they don't need me. And this can be, there are numerous examples. I could pull out any in the environmental community. If you're working on something, here in Los Angeles, they're making efforts to have people cut back on water conservation because of the long-term drought. And we've made a lot of progress. But if you tell a story where we've made progress or it looks like, we've done it, folks, you can go back to wasting water now, that would be a tragedy. There's still much more work to be done. So yes, we can report on the progress, but make it clear that there's still work to be done and make it clear what people need to do. We are just a couple minutes away from the ending here. I want to do this. I've got a little bit of housekeeping to share with you, and I want to throw it back to Judy because I know she has some things to share with you. So let me do that. First of all, if you want to go deeper on your own, some books I can recommend. The Story Factor by Annette Simmons is just an excellent book on the art and craft of storytelling. For those of you who wonder about, well, what's the role of data in all of this? Numbers and Nerves just came out in the last few months by Scott and Paul Slovic. It's a wonderful series of essays about how we need both. We need the stories to get people's attention and the data to show them that there is more than one story to be told. So I highly recommend Numbers and Nerves. And if you just want some enjoyable reading, Listening is an Act of Love, a collection of stories from the StoryCorps project, where two people go into a booth and tell a story in just a few minutes. Now, if you want to stay in touch, there are a couple ways we can do it. This is one of several. Today, this webinar is a version of several different webinars we do on the Goodman Center. Check out our website, thegoodmancenter.com. There are 6 different classes. If you've enjoyed the style of this webinar, you can see webinars in presenting, strategic communications, even how to have a good webinar. I tweet under the name Goodman Center, and I only tweet about best practices in public interest communications. And we have a monthly newsletter called Free Range Thinking, which is also about best practices and case studies. Go to thegoodmancenter.com, the resources section, give us your email address, and we will send this to you for free once a month, no cost, charge, or obligation. When you quit these conference controls after Judy comes back, an evaluation form will pop up in your browser. It's a chance for you to give us some feedback. Let us know what you liked about today's webinar or what we could do better. And if you have a question we didn't get to, you can put it in the comment box. That will come to us, and we promise to answer your questions. And with that, I want to turn it back to Judy for her closing business and to say goodbye. Judy?
Thanks, Andy, and really appreciate you sharing your wisdom on everything about storytelling. I really love the examples. They really bring everything to life. For everybody on the call, we will be sharing a recording of this on EE Pro, and Kristen Kunkel, who is our amazing NAAEE specialist who has been helping me with this webinar series and has just been fantastic, will be sending out an email with all the information that you need about how to access not only this recording, but also Andy's keynote from the conference last year, which was also fantastic. So if you just go on our website, NAAEE.org, and look on EE Pro, you can always find out what's going on with webinars, not just our webinars, but any webinars and learning opportunities that are taking place. So just go to EE Pro, go to the Learning button, and you'll see all the different kinds of learning opportunities that are there. And you can do all kinds of other things, including join a discussion group, find other people, get resources, look for jobs, all of that. And you just need to log in using your credentials. And if you have any problems, just let us know. And again, stay tuned for our next webinar, which is actually June 8th, why this webinar was going on. I heard confirmation that IANTHA can join. So we have an amazing panel focused on building a stronger and more inclusive movement with a fantastic group of individuals. We also have some other webinars coming up. Nicole Arduin from Stanford talking about collective impact, Esri, early childhood, climate and community resilience. So keep your eye out on EE Pro. and because you're part of this, you'll get the announcements as well. And if you have any additional questions, please reach out to me or Kristen, and as well, fill out the evaluation for Andy if you have more questions for him. But Andy, thank you so much, and Celia, this was fantastic. And thanks to all of you for sticking on the line. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you next time. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Judy. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Andy.
Bye-bye now.